Good afternoon. I call the National Assembly for Wales to order. Item 1, questions to the First Minister. Question 1, Simon Thomas. Will the First Minister make a statement on the devolution of powers over teachers' pay and conditions? Well, I broadly welcome the recommendations of the Silk Commission to devolve powers over teachers' pay and conditions. However, I must stress that any such transfer of powers must include an appropriate allocation of resources. Thank you, First Minister. In a fringe meeting, the Plaid Cymru conference in Llangollen a week ago, there were two of the Welsh unions represented and were discussing this issue. And although there was a difference of opinion, I have to say both were agreed that it would be better to establish a process now at the national Welsh level to discuss these issues rather than waiting for Westminster to decide and actually insist upon devolution without providing adequate resources. So will you as a government actually put this process in train of discussing with teachers and the unions so that we can look at the kind of national system for pay and conditions of teachers that we could establish in Wales? Well, that's something that the Minister has raised from time to time with the unions. There are differences of opinion among the unions as to whether they support the idea or not. But as a government, of course, we can see that there would be benefits for having such a system to Wales as there is in Scotland. But what's crucially important is to ensure that there is sufficient resources and funding available so that we can implement any new system.
Davis?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, last year an inquiry found that supply teachers were paid far less when employed through agencies rather than directly by schools. Now, given that there are 5,000 supply teachers here in Wales and there are around 40 agencies recruiting these teachers, can you tell us what discussions your government has had with the UK government on this specific issue? Personally, I've had no such discussions, but there is a means of dealing with this, namely ensuring that the powers over teachers' pay and conditions do reside here in the Assembly and with the Welsh Government. But I will ask the Minister to write to you with any further details that he may have.
Roberts?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I'm sure that each and every one of us would agree that there should be adequate resources transferred with the powers, but does the government have any intention to do any preparatory work in this area in order to assess exactly what your requirements would be, given, of course, the negotiations currently ongoing? Well, this has been done in the past. There have been proposals put forward to government in the past to take on these powers, but without the appropriate resources. But some work has been done as to how many additional people we would have to employ in order to actually put this system in train. And on top of that, of course, it would be up to every political party to ensure that they decide how they would actually use the new powers provided to Wales. But certainly that is something for the manifestos in 2 years' time.
Question 2, Gwenda Thomas.
Question 2, Gwenda Thomas.
Officer, First Minister, will you outline the achievements of the Western Valleys Regeneration Area Initiative in Neath?
Yes, the area has provided almost £2.6 million to facilitate various projects in Neath, supporting employment, leisure, businesses, improved access and transport, and it has in fact drawn down over £10 million in match funding.
Thank you for that response. In my constituency, Glynneath has benefited from £360,000 of funding that has vastly improved the town centre and this vital valley hub. The local Labour councillor described the regeneration scheme as absolutely first class. Now that the heavy lifting is complete, what we would like to see is targeted support to maintain the momentum of improvement. First Minister, what is the Welsh Government undertaking to focus the Support Your High Street campaign and Small Business Saturday and other such programmes on towns like Glynneath so that we can build on the successes of the Western Valleys initiative?
Well, I'm pleased to say that the High Street campaign last September was a success with activities across Wales, including in the town of Neath. And it's important to build on the successes we've seen in Glynneath and, of course, in Neath Further down the valley, we are supporting Neath to establish a business improvement district, which will be important for all those who live in the Neath and Delice valleys. I can also say that Neath was successful in its town centre partnership application. It will receive £40,000 over the next 2 years to enhance its marketing and promotion, to develop digital technology, such as a smartphone app and an events programme, to build, of course, on its existing food and drink festival. And it's the sort of creative thinking we want to see across the whole of Wales.
Susie Davis.
Diolch Llywydd. First Minister, your vision for the Western Valleys is that by 2015, the Western Valleys will embrace a network of distinctive, vibrant, sustainable communities that are confident and secure in themselves and with their relationship to the wider world. Now, Neath Talbot Council seem determined to cut themselves off from the wider world, having axed all their funding for tourism. Now, is that a responsible decision for a local council when tourism is a key economic driver? And will the Future Generations Bill as drafted secure a more considered approach to tourism from councils which have access to this kind of money?
Well, these are matters, of course, for Neath Talbot Council, but what they have done is to secure loan funding of £13 million from the Government's Regeneration Investment Fund Wales to deliver a new retail-led development in Neath Town Centre. I don't think Neath Talbot Council can be accused of sitting on the fence.
Bethan Jenkins.
As someone who lives close to Glynneath, I do welcome the fact that things have been regenerated and that developments have taken place. But what concerns me in the statement that Susie Davis referred to, it refers to the word sustainable. And as you know, there are a number of open cast planning applications in the Glynneath area. So how are you as a government going to ensure that people who want to come into work in the tourism sector, whilst there are these developments which run contrary to the sustainable agenda in that area? I would expect any planning applications in terms of mining and open cast to follow the guidance that is in place at present, and the guidance which is quite robust in terms as to when and where any developments should be considered.
Cwestiynau gan arwenwyr
Questions from the party leaders, and I first call the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew R.T. Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, today in the Public Accounts Committee, a letter was submitted to the Chairman and members around the escalation status that 3 of the health boards have found themselves in here in Wales. Betsy Cadwaladr in particular was identified as being at the highest category of escalation status. This involves interference, if you like, in the running of the health board by the Welsh Government because you do not believe that the health board is in a suitable place to be able to deliver the services that you've charged it to deliver in that area. Isn't the BMA's assertion that the Welsh NHS is facing imminent meltdown now coming a reality when such letters are being delivered to the Public Accounts Committee about LHBs in escalated status?
See, this is the main difference between us and him. When we see a problem, we deal with it. He sits back and wants an inquiry and do absolutely nothing about it at all. Sit back and spend a few years navel-gazing, in my view. I mean, the difference is this. When we see a problem, we deal with it. And this is what's happened with Betsy Cadwaladr. That's why they're having this extra help. We would not want, would we, our hospitals to be like Hereford County Hospital under his party, which is in special measures, which has been described as inadequate and unsafe. Yet he doesn't call for an inquiry into the English NHS. I wonder why.
What a remarkable answer. At the end of the day, if we take one... It's remarkable for its flippancy, to be honest with you, First Minister. If we take one example in BCW's area, urology, for example. There was a report published recently that were in the board minutes, so this isn't a confidential document that I'm quoting from, that said that the urology patients were facing the most difficult waiting times in the United Kingdom. There was a lack of grip, and the issues were insignificantly a lack of understanding around the issues that led to these waiting times. It also said that there were hundreds of bladder cancer cases waiting for an appointment time. It went on to say that the outcomes were very negative for resolving this issue within the health board. When you talk about imminent collapse, when we talk about difficulties within the health service, what do those hundreds of urology patients feel when they see a report that's been drafted by that particular health board, and in particular the director of the cancer networks, about the service that they can expect in Wales and the lack of action from you and your government?
Well, what I say to them is this: cancer treatment times are better in Wales in every regard. We spend more on cancer treatment in Wales per head than is the case in England. And let's be quite clear that the issue that he's referred to in Betsi Cadwaladr is a particular issue that's been caused by the retirement of one consultant and the sudden death of another. And that has caused a difficulty, short-term, but a difficulty for the Health Board in order to cover the services that they provided. And they are at present looking to recruit, given the fact through those unforeseen circumstances, they have lost 2 consultants. They are working with neighbouring urology providers in England to ensure that patients are treated in order of clinical priority until replacement consultants are appointed. It's important that people get access to the treatment that they require. They get that in Wales when it comes to cancer treatment, but there will be occasions because of retirement and a sudden death, unfortunately, where there are short-term problems that need to be resolved, but we are confident that they are being resolved.
First Minister, when such a tragedy happens like a death, that is truly a tragedy that no one can foresee. But ultimately, when you look at this report that the board themselves have considered and have pointed not to tens of people waiting on these waiting times, but hundreds of people waiting on these waiting times, there is something far more deep-seated about the issues that are going on in the North Wales Health Board. Now, ultimately, First Minister, you can rant and rave as much as you want here, but when a letter is delivered... Well, when a letter is delivered that says 3 of the 7 health boards in Wales are facing escalation status, and one of those health boards is at the most severe status in the grid that you put forward, there is something very seriously wrong with the health service here in Wales. But as you want to stand there week in, week out and deny there's anything wrong, will you commit to the OECD coming over and comparing the Welsh NHS against all the other health services in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, so that we can see genuinely who is on the right side of this argument? Is it the doctors and the BMA, or is it the Labour politicians sitting around that failed cabinet table?
I can guarantee him, if I spoke to most doctors in Wales and I tread on difficult ground again, they would prefer to be in Wales in his party, running the NHS in England. That much I can promise him. The other thing he must understand, I mean, he talks about ranting and raving, he's had an irony transplant yet again. He didn't know the circumstances in urology, did he, in Betsi Cadwaladr? He didn't understand that it was a short-term problem. He just leapt in, bullet the gate as ever, without checking the circumstances. If he looks at his party's handling of the NHS in England, he will see hospitals in England in special measures. He will see trusts that are bankrupt. He will see cancer treatment times that are worse than in Wales. But does he call for an inquiry in England? No, he does not. We all see this for what it is, a politically inspired attack on the NHS in Wales and NHS staff in Wales.
Nesa Arwenydd.
Next, the Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
First Minister, I think we share concerns about the dangers to Wales that would come about from an EU exit. Just last week it was confirmed that this country will receive another £2 billion of EU investment up to 2020, and you'll be aware that many businesses have expressed concerns about their future in the event of an EU exit. Has the Welsh Government undertaken an assessment of the impact on Wales of a UK withdrawal from the European Union?
Yes, we have. It would leave us worse off. At the very minimum, we would be £150 million worse off in terms of spending. That is the bare minimum. But 150,000 jobs in Wales depend on our free access to the European market. Farming, of course, gets £200 million a year from the European Union, without which farming in Wales would collapse. It would not exist. It is absolutely essential for us to remain part of that larger market. Again, I was in India, as members will know, last week. The Economy Minister was in Japan. One of the main questions we are asked is what's happening with the UK's membership of the EU. And not being part of that larger market would be exceptionally difficult, and that's an underestimate, for the Welsh economy to cope with. It's absolutely essential that Wales remains part of the EU.
Thank you, First Minister. Now, the German Chancellor has said, well, she's described the Prime Minister's statements on this as getting to the point of no return, or so it is reported anyway. Now, I'm sure that the First Minister will agree with me that it would be wholly unacceptable for Wales to be dragged out of the European Union against the will of the people of Wales. If he does agree with me on that point, will his government and his party support a clause in legislation requiring a majority in each nation of the UK before a withdrawal from the EU can be triggered?
I think that is worth considering. Can I say that I think if the UK, I don't think the UK will leave the EU. I think, given the opinion polling we've seen recently, it's unlikely. When people are not sure of something, they tend to stick to the status quo. We've had more referendums in Wales since 1961 than Switzerland, probably, and we have experience of this. If the UK leaves the EU on the basis of English votes, it would trigger a constitutional crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen. I think in Scotland, it would lead to demands for another referendum, because in Scotland, one of the issues that caused people to vote no was uncertainty over EU membership. If that's removed, then I've no doubt that will be the dynamic in Scotland. Northern Ireland, where EU membership is an exceptionally important part of the peace process. And let's remember, the UK has a large open land border with the Republic of Ireland. It is impossible to count people in and out because that border has a motorway running across it. Unless you want to build a Berlin Wall around it to keep people out, then the reality is that would become, according to some, the Conservative Party and UKIP, the border between the UK and the EU. So there are much wider dimensions here, and I think it's exceptionally important that the UK remains in the EU. But if English votes take the UK out, that creates immense problems for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
I welcome the First Minister's response, and I would ask him, therefore, to join me in exploring the possibility of a cross-party All Wales position on this question. So, would you agree with me, therefore, that we can, if we can, get to speak as one strong voice in the interests of Wales on this question, then we could avoid Wales being dragged out of the EU against the will of the people here?
The Leader of Plaid Cymru makes the assumption that the Conservatives will win with a majority in May. An assumption that I don't know whether it was a yawn or a roar of approval from the Leader of the Opposition. It sounded a bit of both. But I'll take it as the latter in order to be generous to him. I don't accept that will be the outcome of the general election. We have to see, first of all, whether there will be a referendum. But I think it will be important for all who believe that Wales is stronger within the EU to get together and articulate that position very clearly if such a referendum is called.
And finally, Leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams.
Presiding Officer, First Minister, last year the Welsh Government received over £8.5 million as a result of the pharmaceutical price regulation scheme. Could you tell us what that money was spent on?
As with all monies, goes into the block grant, and then of course it's a matter for the Assembly to decide via the budget process as to how that money is spent.
First Minister, your government says that new medicines should be available within 3 months of approval from NICE or from the All Wales Medicines Strategy Group. Could you outline to the Chamber what you're doing to ensure that those medicines are not simply listed on formulary by local health boards, but are actually available for clinicians to prescribe to their patients? And would you consider using the monies from the PPRS to prioritise the uptake of new medicines that have been approved by NICE and the All Wales Medicines Strategy Group?
Well, if there is no bar on GPs prescribing a particular medicine, they're able to do it. That's my understanding of it. For example, at the end, or as of this month, the All Wales Medicine Strategy Group had appraised and recommended 19 new cancer medicines for use in the NHS in Wales. And of course, they are now routinely available to eligible patients. If they are routinely available and have been approved, there is no reason why they shouldn't be prescribed.
First Minister, I think there is a world of difference between technically being able to prescribe and the reality on the ground for clinicians and for their patients. Academic evidence from the Office of Health Economics at Bangor University has highlighted issues in the prescribing of new drugs, for instance, such as the new generation of oral anticoagulants. Despite being approved for usage, the report found that they are being introduced in a more constrained manner because, and I quote the report, if they introduce the guidance to its fullest extent, that would have a crippling effect on the finances of the local health board. I ask you again, what will your government do to ensure that your guidance is implemented by local health boards and that patients and clinicians are able to use drugs that have been approved and they want to use for their patients?
Well, I'm not aware of the study that she mentions, but as I say, we would expect where drugs are approved and where guidance is issued that those drugs should be available. I remember being told this by Dr. Brian Gibbons when he was here, that as a GP, he could prescribe anything unless it was specifically not allowed. I remember he said to me that it was technically possible for doctors to prescribe things like, in the past anyway, like Oxo. And he was prescribed. It is a question not of what are you able to prescribe, but what are you not able to prescribe. On that basis, then, I would expect those drugs that are available through the usual processes, whether it's NICE or through the AWMSG, to be then made available to the general public via prescribing physicians. If there's evidence that isn't happening, I'd be grateful to see it.
We now move back to questions on the paper, and question 3 is Janet Finch-Saunders.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the Minister make a statement on civil contingency and emergency planning in Wales?
Yes, we provide de facto national leadership in civil contingency and emergency planning, though much of it, of course, de jure is not devolved.
Thank you, First Minister. According to the Wales Audit Office, environmental health services are becoming unstable in Wales, spending down to less than 0.5%, shrinking budget since 2011, combined with further cuts to communicable disease budgets. They maintain that our authorities will be unable to complete their statutory duties. Against this is the backdrop of previous E. coli cases, norovirus, and now the potentially life-threatening Ebola pandemic. As the First Minister, you are charged with the ultimate responsibility for our public safety here in Wales. Given the threat of Ebola, against a backdrop of such cuts, what assurances can you give me today that this is not a disaster waiting to happen and that all contingency plans will not be adversely affected by these cuts?
I'm quite stunned by that question, the way it was phrased, but she will know that some 2 weeks ago I gave a very full answer in terms of our preparations for Ebola. It is something ultimately for Public Health Wales, not for local authorities. I mean, they are charged with environmental health and with trading standards. Public health is not a matter that they would deal with. That's a matter for Public Health Wales, funded through the government. She will know, of course, there's a public health bill that the Minister will seek to promote through this Assembly in due course. There's no evidence to suggest that the preparations for communicable diseases, she mentioned Ebola particularly, are anything other than utterly robust. And that is the case, I have to say, not just in Wales, but across the rest of the UK as well.
Anne Jones.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the Fire Service is an integral part to any civil contingency system and any emergency planning across Wales. Therefore, can I say thank you on behalf of the communities across Wales whose fire services have remained working this week over the last weekend, unlike those in England who have had to go out on strike action because of the inactions of the Tory government over the ongoing dispute of the Fire Brigade Union. Can I pay tribute to you and your government ministers for the way in which they've opened negotiations with the Fire Brigade Union to avert that strike action here in Wales? And will you join me in saying thank you to the fire service in the run-up to Bonfire Night, which is one of their busiest times, but also throughout the years, year in, year out, when we know we can rely on the fire service here in Wales under your leadership as a Welsh Government? And will you talk to the England Government, to the DCLG, and get them round the table as well?
I have to be careful with the last point. I mean, if someone was invited in the House of Commons to get the UK government to talk to the Welsh government, the answer might be quite short. So I'll leave that as a matter for the DCLG. But I welcome her comments. We have Bonfire Night, of course, that is tomorrow night, of course. And we know that there are often great calls on the fire service at that time of year. Our room for manoeuvre with regard to this issue has been quite limited due to the funding structure that we have in place for the fire service, but nevertheless we're pleased with the fact that the fire service and the FBU representatives feel that there is much to discuss, and we'll continue those discussions.
Howell?
First Minister, with winter approaching, we'll soon be marking the first anniversary of last year's storms, which hit our coastline with such devastating consequences. And in that context, in the clean-up effort in towns such as Aberystwyth, it became ever more clear how important the role is of local champions in coordinating the response, but also in the longer term in encouraging continued investment in flood defence, sometimes measures as simple as shutters within properties that are facing the coast. In that context, First Minister, and given that we're likely to experience further storms in the time to come, what specific actions has the Welsh Government and NRW taken during the course of the last 12 months to enhance community resilience in the face of the threats that we will face in the future?
Well, first of all, of course, we provided over £10 million to local authorities and NRW to repair the damages of last winter. There has been investment, of course, in property-level protection by Natural Resources Wales. But, of course, the key to flood management in terms of the coastline is via shoreline management plans, and local authorities, NRW and other bodies are involved in that process. And those plans, as with plans for flooding inland, have to be reviewed periodically given climate change. I remember introducing TAN 15, if I remember, in this chamber, in, I think it was 2005, 2006, and it was seen as an extreme response, that we were going too far in terms of prohibiting building in floodplains that were subject to what was then regarded as a 1 in 1,000 year flood risk. Now that is seen as having been surpassed, given the events that we've seen last year and in the years gone by. So the shoreline management plans, the work that NRW has done, the investment that they've made in flood prevention, all these things will help us to be as secure as we can be with the winter coming.
Question 4, John Griffiths.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the impact of the Welsh Government's strategy to deliver greater equality of opportunity in Wales?
Yes, our strategic equality plan is focused on tackling inequality and achieving greater fairness through delivering on 8 outcome-focused equality objectives, and we will publish the next annual report in March of next year.
First Minister, the Labour movement is about social justice and equality of opportunity and outcome. Will you agree with me that the Living Wage campaign will further these objectives if realised, that employers have much to gain in terms of better staff retention and a more productive and committed workforce, for example? And will you commit the Welsh Government to working with the campaign, with the Living Wage Foundation, the trade unions, employers and civic society to make Wales a living wage nation? And also, would you agree that the UK Government needs to recognise and reward employers who become living wage employers, understanding that UK Government will then pay less in benefits and receive more in taxation as a result?
Very true, and the member, of course, summarises what we stand for on these benches, particularly. I can say that our programme for government does set out a commitment to work with trade unions, with employers and other stakeholders to explore ways of ensuring a living wage for every worker in Wales, and we remain, of course, committed to that approach. The Workforce Partnership Council is, in my view, the right platform for these discussions to take place, and that is where we will continue in our quest to make sure that the minimum wage having been won, the next challenge of the living wage is faced and met.
Mohammed Ashgar.
Madam Presiding Officer, First Minister, in November last year, I called on the Welsh Government to consider introducing a fund like the one introduced by the UK Government to provide greater opportunity for disabled people to stand in elections, local council elections, assembly election and UK Parliament election. Will the First Minister advise what consideration has been given to this and what plan does his government have to make it easier for disabled people to stand for election in Wales?
Well, these are matters for political parties, in my view. It's important that we all as parties strive to be as inclusive and as diverse as we possibly can be. We all have work to do. None of us is in a perfect position when it comes to equality. But I do think that it's not a question of public funds being made available to encourage people to stand, because they have to be made to feel welcome and supported by political parties as well. And that's a challenge for us all.
Lindsay Whittle.
Diolch, Llywydd. What action is the Welsh Government taking to create an equitable distribution of apprenticeships so that opportunities for apprenticeships are equally available across Wales and not just in the A55 and M4 corridors, please?
Well, if you look at Jobs Growth Wales, you will see that apprenticeships are reasonably widely distributed. It is, of course, one of the most successful schemes, if not the most successful scheme in terms of the creation of jobs in Europe and sustainable jobs as well. We want to make sure, of course, that it is the case that people are able to access apprenticeships as they can across the whole of Wales.
Christine Chapman.
Thank you. The cross-party women in the economy group recently heard from Professor Alan Felsted that whilst women in full-time employment are likely to be in skilled work, women part-timers stand a greater chance of being in low-skilled jobs and of being unable to use the skills and qualifications they possess. Do you agree, First Minister, that there is a cultural issue here around part-time work not being valued as much as full-time equivalent, which has serious repercussions for equality of opportunity? And First Minister, whilst the Welsh Government has a good record as an employer in this area, what can it do to tackle this attitude more widely in Welsh society?
I think the member is right. We know that women are more likely than men to take on part-time work, and it's undoubtedly correct that much of that part-time work is low paid. We know that from the figures that we have seen. The question that's asked is, what can we do about it as a government? Well, we have clear strategic goals that are linked to the programme for government to increase the participation, progression and retention of women in the economy, focusing on key need and impact. We're a small nation, we can't afford to see talent wasted, and it's important that we maximise that talent. And of course it's important that we seek to encourage, although this is not something that we have direct control over, more flexible and more sustainable working practices to enable people to work full-time where they want and are able to do that, and then of course to make sure that there is no indirect discrimination because of working practices and to increase further flexibility in the workforce. But we also committed to increasing the number of women starting and growing businesses, and of course the great challenge of improving access to high quality childcare, and that is something that we continue to consider, and I've no doubt will be a live election issue both next year and the year after.
Question 5, Lindsay Whittle.
Thank you, Llywydd. What progress, Minister, is being made to achieve the target of eradicating child poverty by the year 2020?
Well, it has to be said, the levels of child poverty remain stubbornly high. 1 in 3 children are affected. We are committed still to the ambition of eradicating child poverty, but there is a great challenge, of course, in the light of UK government welfare reforms and reducing budgets, as well as the squeeze on people's incomes that many people have felt. We are, though, investing in early years and prevention to affect the longer-term outcomes. One example of that, of course, is Flying Start.
So thank you for your answer. I don't disagree with much of what you say. But in view of the fact that 5 of the worst areas in Wales with regard to child poverty, 4 of them are actually in the southeast region that I and other colleagues here represent. What action is the Welsh Government taking to work with the 4 local authorities in particular and other public bodies in order to reduce that child poverty then?
Well, let me give 5 examples. First of all, Communities First, a long-established programme that has done so much for many communities and restored their confidence. Families First, Flying Start, and supporting people, making a real difference to the lives of children in our poorest communities. Also, of course, the People Deprivation Grant, that certainly has provided, in the past £918 per eligible pupil, up to 1,050, and in 2016 to 17 increased to 1,150 per eligible child. There are 5 programmes there then that make a real difference to family and child poverty, but of course we need the UK government to do its bit as well.
Mick Anthony.
First Minister, you'll be aware of the report commissioned by the coalition government some time ago, chaired by Alan Milburn, which actually made quite a number of positive comments about the progress being made within Wales as a result of Welsh Government policies to eradicate child poverty. Of course, the pressure as a result of austerity measures on funding has had its impact. But do you agree with me that it's still fundamental as a priority for Welsh Government that access to early years education is a cornerstone of removing and eliminating child poverty?
Absolutely. And the earlier we can get children into some form of education, the better. I've been quite shocked in one or two of the schools in my constituency where they often have 3-year-olds coming in who can't speak. Because, of course, they at home, it's the television or it's a computer, and they're not able to articulate sentences. Now, of course, unless there's early intervention, they will forever be behind their peers. And that's why early years education is so important, in order to give the opportunity and fairness that we all want to see for young children, particularly those at the youngest end of the scale.
Andrew Davis.
Presiding Officer, the Children's Commissioner back in 2012 raised concerns about the direction that the Welsh Government was taking around eradicating child poverty. You've listed a whole pile of schemes there that have been in existence quite a few years now, but he also followed up his remarks with saying that the Welsh Government's strategies lack vision and leadership. Now, irrespective of size of budget and initiatives, if you haven't got leadership and vision, then they're not going to go anywhere. What efforts have the Welsh Government undertaken to address the Children's Commissioner's remarks, and in particular either allay his fears or address his concerns and change the direction?
I would take that more seriously if I knew what his proposals actually were to deal with child poverty. Much criticism, but not much in terms of policy development. But he asks a question, I'll answer it. We've got the Tackling Poverty Action Plan. That is where we outline how we will deal with child poverty. There are targets for reducing the number of babies born with a low birth weight, improving the educational attainment of pupils eligible for free school meals, reducing the number of young people who are not in education, employment or training, amongst other things. So we are doing our bit. I would love to know what his party's plans are for dealing with child poverty beyond cutting benefits.
Jeff Cuthbert.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, you mentioned the impact of welfare reform as a difficulty we have to face in terms of tackling child poverty. Do you agree with me that our independent research, which shows that each working age adult in Wales will lose about £500 per annum, totalling a £900 million loss to the Welsh economy, is an absolute condemnation of the welfare reform plans of the UK government?
Well, the injustice of it all is that the targets of benefit cuts have been, by and large, working families. People who are in low-paid work, who are now seeing their incomes squeezed, people who are working very hard. If you look at the bedroom tax, again, people who are working, sometimes being forced to move, to leave the areas where they live and work, because they cannot afford to stay in properties that are judged to be too big for them. Now, the Leader of the Opposition can sigh as much as he wants to. This is alien ground for him. He has no conception of the way this works for ordinary people on the ground. But what I can say to him is this. He has no right to preach about child poverty or to preach about the difficulties that people have in terms of making ends meet when he sits there and supports the removal of support for hard-working, low-paid families. If he stood up and did something for them, perhaps more people would listen to him.
Yeah. Question 6, Antoinette Sandbach.
First Minister, what action is the Welsh Government taking to make sure that local authorities do not lose money through fraud?
Well, responsibility rests with individual local authorities for ensuring appropriate counter-fraud measures are in place, but they are mandated as well to take part in the National Fraud Initiative, which uses data matching across public sector bodies to identify potentially fraudulent transactions.
First Minister, a recent Freedom of Information Act request by me to Welsh councils indicates in the last 3.5 years, over £16 million has been wrongly paid out in housing benefit payments which are made because of fraud. I'm sure you agree that in times of tightening local authority budgets, this isn't a very satisfactory position, and that this money would be much better spent on frontline services. What will you do to encourage Welsh local authorities to make sure that they minimise any housing benefit fraud that happens in their area, and that they recover money from the fraudsters? Because often council tax fraud goes hand in hand with housing benefit fraud.
Well, I think there will be an inbuilt incentive for local authorities to recover money that has been paid out fraudulently. It's a matter for them, of course, to do that. But it is absolutely right that benefits are made available for those who are eligible for those benefits, and where they are paid fraudulently, it's for local authorities to recover the money.
Weinidogion Thomas.
Prif Weinidog,
First Minister, the local government auditor has declared very clearly what he thinks of in the context of the position in Pembrokeshire at present, that no payment should be made to chief officers who depart from local authorities that are linked to payments made contrary to the law. Is that a warning and a lesson to local government throughout Wales that they should make such payments as these chief officers leave their posts?
I think that's a very fair point. It's very difficult to defend what's happened in certain authorities to the public, and it's extremely important that local authorities, when they do employ someone in a senior position, that they do ensure that they don't find themselves in a position where when that people does leave, that they have to pay them hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I don't think that the public would expect them to do that, and it's a lesson to each and every local authority in Wales in terms of ensuring that they do things properly and not make these payments which are indefensible in the mind of the public.
Question 7, Gwyn Price.
Will the First Minister make a statement about the attendances at tourist attractions in Wales?
Yes, according to a Visit Wales survey, almost 13 million visits were made to attractions in Wales in 2013. And of course, we know there's been a substantial increase in the last 6 months in the numbers of visitors from abroad.
Thank you for that answer. In August, the Welsh Government included Cwm Carn Forest Drive in my constituency in a list of top 10 most popular free attractions in Wales. I recently attended a public meeting hosted by the Friends of Cwm Carn Forest Drive. Many constituents raised concerns that the felling with the diseased larch trees could have an effect on the attendance at the resort. Will the First Minister join me in publicising that the bike and the walking trails, the play areas and the visiting centre at Cwm Carn Forest Drive will remain open for business as usual while this work takes place?
Yes, it's important to say that. Unfortunately, there's no alternative other than to take the diseased larch down. It's going to take well, the route will be closed for at least 2 years in order for that to happen. So while the Forest Drive itself, which I'm familiar with, will be closing, to emphasise all footpaths and mountain bike routes will remain open, as will the visitor centre, which I know is run by the council. The campsite, which includes 10 glamping pods, will also remain open, as will the play area, gift shop and Ravens Cafe. So it's far from the case that Cwm Carn Forest is somehow closed for business.
William Graham.
Officer. The latest published Welsh Government statistics for visits to tourist attractions in Wales 2013 showed that 8 of the 10 top free attractions had a decline in attendance. One of the 2 attractions with increased visitors was the Cwm Carn Forest Drive. I accept the assurances that the First Minister has given this afternoon, but he hasn't actually told us that the actual drive element will reopen.
Well, it's a matter for NRW to decide that. At the moment, I sense that they don't want to give the impression that the drive will open by a particular time and then find that they can't open it by that time. So we all understand the importance of the drive, and of course it's for NRW to make sure that the disease is dealt with and then give consideration then to reopening it. But I suspect they are concerned about giving a particular date only to find perhaps that there's more disease than originally thought, or there are greater difficulties in terms of the logistics. But let's put it this way, government understands how important the Forest Drive is to the area.
Rhys Iorwerth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Increasing the number of visitors to attractions in Wales is extremely important, and extending the season is also important. And I certainly congratulate those businesses in my constituency and the members of the Anglesey Tourism Association who work very hard in order to realise that. But does the First Minister share my concern and many of the other people in the association that Wales won't be able to reach its potential until the government spends significantly more on marketing what we have to offer in tourism?
Well, we have to bear in mind too that marketing takes place by UKTI also, and I've seen marketing, it was Visit Britain I meant rather than UKTI, and that actually promotes and supports Wales also. But may I say that we know that the number of foreign visitors has increased from 21% in the first half of this year, which is way more than the UK as a whole, and we know that there are more people coming into Wales now, but the decision taken by Visit Wales has been to concentrate on certain markets, namely Ireland, Germany and the United States, in order to ensure that there is growth in those markets. But of course work is also being done by Visit Britain. Elena Parrott.
One way we can drive up visitor numbers without spending hugely more money is through joint promotion and joint ticketing schemes for attractions. But while many private attractions are collaborating in that way, the Welsh Government body tasked with promoting Wales's heritage as a whole still only promotes its own venues. So even Cardiff Castle is missing from Cadw's website, would you believe? Will you instruct Cadw to do more to promote the Welsh heritage sites it doesn't directly manage, for example, by including them on the Days Out section of their website, where, as I say, many of them are missing, and providing information on other local attractions to visitors who do attend their sites?
Well, I mean, Cadw don't run Cardiff Castle, of course. It's a matter for the city. It was given to the city after the war. I don't think that's the point, in fairness to the member she was making. What she said was, I mean, that was my original impression. She then went on to say that, you know, Cardiff Castle isn't part of Cadw's promotion and perhaps should be. Well, Cadw's role, of course, primarily is not to promote other attractions. Their role, of course, is to safeguard the sites that they have and to enhance them and to promote visitors to their sites. Visit Wales, however, and indeed local authorities to an extent, do have the responsibility to promote attractions more widely. Does that mean that leaflets shouldn't be available in different places? Well, no, I think it's important that all those sites that attract visitors, whether they're public or private, should work together to maximise benefit for the local community.
George Watson.
Diolch, Llywyd. Sometimes Wales's best attractions are those that just pass through, like migrant birds that we get this time of the year, and the superpod of dolphins in Pembrokeshire waters more recently. But it is the permanent fixtures that are tremendously important to the local economies. And according to the Welsh Association of Visitor Attractions, there are around 18 million visits to Welsh attractions every year, employing 7,500 people. So, First Minister, when you next meet with Visit Wales, will you press the economic importance of Wales attractions and the need to promote them both here at home and abroad?
Well, indeed, they know that. It's our biggest industry. We know it employs many thousands of people. But we also know that the number of overnight trips made by GB residents to Wales was up by 7.8% in the first 6 months of this year. I've already mentioned the international figures. The amount spent whilst in Wales is also up by 2.1% by all visitors. So we know that Wales is more and more on the map. And of course, I've no doubt that the NATO conference would also have helped, particularly the unsolicited but welcome endorsement of the US President.
Question 8, Marcus Wood.
Will the First Minister outline the future development of transport provision in North Wales?
Yes, we recognise the importance of an effective transport system across the North, and the North Wales Transport Task Force will be providing recommendations for further improvements.
Thank you. Well, speaking at Wrexham's business dinner 12 days ago, Wrexham's Labour MP described the region's rail system as deficient. He added, and I quote, "The Welsh Government invested tens of millions in introducing the Valleys and Vale of Glamorgan lines, invested the whole of the 2014-19 Wales rail budget in electrification of the South Wales Main Line and Valleys lines, and recently announced an intention to invest £1 billion in the M4 motorway. It must recognise that investment in infrastructure in Wales' most important industrial infrastructure, Wrexham and Flintshire, is required urgently. If not, there are fears that the jewel in the crown could be lost to Wales." My response is to agree with him. What is yours?
We're not paying for the electrification of the South Wales Main Line. I mean, despite the disputes that have taken place between us and the UK government, if they've accepted that, then it's not a matter for us. So to say that we have committed money to that is obviously wrong. We are, of course, paying for the upgrade of the Wrexham to Saltley Junction section of the line, which will enable there to be better working of the line. There was, of course, the bypass, if I remember, Wrexham Industrial Estate. That was financed by government. If you look more generally across the north, you see the improvements in the A470, Dolodel and Pontrafanc, Maesr Helmaid across Foxes, the Porthmadog bypass, the Carnarvon and Bont Newydd bypass. These are all investments in the north, and of course the £10 million that form part of the budget agreement with the Liberal Democrats, on which discussions are ongoing as to how best to use that money.
David Ellis-Thomas.
Thank you, Dame Presiding Officer. But Don't the statements made last week on investment in the economy of the north of England, aren't they crucially important to the new infrastructure of North Wales? I am thinking of HS2 reaching Crewe. I hope I will live to see that day. It is to happen 6 years earlier, so I have a better chance. And then following that, isn't it crucially important that we have electrification across North Wales and that that's happened by that point?
Well, my view is that electrification should happen in North Wales too, particularly in the line coming in from Chester to Holyhead. And it's true to say that it'll be the South Wales line that will be electrified first. But of course, we must ensure that electrification happens throughout the whole of Wales in time. And there's no reason to say, well, I was going to say that the former Secretary of State, for Wales, David Jones, was a great champion of electrification for the North Wales line. And we hope that this will come from the UK government in future.
And finally, Alan Roberts.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the statement made last week, and there is also the task force and the North Wales Council have actually received a report from Green Gauge 21 which actually reinforces the case for electrification of the North Wales main line, but one case is based on the extension of cross-border services to Manchester and Liverpool. The draft Arriva Trains Wales timetable actually cuts the number of those services available. So will you as a government make it entirely clear to Arriva Trains Wales that you aren't content to see a reduction in the services between North East Wales and North Wales more generally and the northwest of England as they currently intend to put in place?
Well, no, it's extremely important that they consider the importance of those connections. I know that they are listening because I remember before that there were schemes to create a railway system just within Pembrokeshire almost, and with very few connections out with Pembrokeshire, and that was then amended. And so it's very important that people express their views to them. Of course, there is an issue on the Halton Curve, which is important in order to ensure that trains can run from Wrexham to Liverpool through Birkenhead. That's extremely important for the future in order to create those connections. But no, I would wish to ensure that Wrexham as a town creates the best connections that have been created to Cardiff as well as Liverpool and Manchester.
We now move to item 2, which is a business statement.